Okay, it's preparing the live stream.
Hi, everyone. We're all live, right? Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini.
Before you do that, remember you normally
okay.
add in a title? Help me with adding the title in.
Does the title will be on? Okay, when you're doing it to
Yep.
stream. All right, so go ahead. What was your thought?
Community leadership.
Yeah, you had a community leadership and social and
racial
justice. Yeah? I think that works.
Yep, that works. Okay, I think I've got that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, it seems like I'm getting a lag on this, so. We are live.
Okay.
Hi, this is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life in the City of Peachtree Corners. We have a special show today, part of a series of episodes that we're going to be doing over the next 2 weeks. And my co-host in this is my co-host from Capitalist Sage, Karl Barham. And we have a great panel here to be able to discuss our issues today. So Karl, why don't you lead it off?
Sure. On May 26, 2020, there's been a series of protests that started after an African-American male named George Floyd was killed during police arrest in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then a couple of weeks later, on June 12th, a 27-year-old African-American father was shot and killed by Atlanta police after responding to a complaint that he was asleep in his car. So if you look at today, June 25th marks about a month that there have been protests around the country involving social and racial justice in the communities. Today on Peachtree Corners Life, we wanted to invite some local residents and leaders to start a discussion on community leadership in social and racial justice so that people can find ways at the local level, right here in Peachtree Corners and others, to impact change as necessary to keep their communities safe for all citizens during encounters with law enforcement, but also find ways that individuals and community leaders can improve and address social injustice in its many forms. What can a citizen do? Let's have that discussion. I'd like to start off by introducing our guests today, and I'm going to go around and have each one of them introduce themselves, starting with Julie Morgan, a resident here in Peachtree Corners. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Julie. My husband and I have lived in Peachtree Corners for 8 years now. He works in the film industry all over Atlanta. We have 3 small children. When we moved to Peachtree Corners, I was a teacher in a charter school in DeKalb County. Once we had our eldest daughter, I quit my job in order to stay home. We attend Victory Church in Norcross, which is one of the most diverse churches in the country. We live in Greenleaf neighborhood, which is fairly diverse for Peachtree Corners. And we love living here. So I don't know, Karl pegged me as a community leader. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but we host a lot of community events at our home. We love being involved with people in Peachtree Corners.
Thank you very much. Jimmy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Kim. I am a Peachtree Corners resident myself. My wife and I and our family have been in Peachtree Corners since, 2011. So a good amount of time. Actually, it goes further back than that, but a long time in Peachtree Corners. We live, I guess, in the North Manor subdivision or area, and my wife works as a scientist, a public health scientist. We have two kids that go to Simpson Elementary. And for me, my job, I work at Periment Church as the director of Redemptive Unity. And Periment is just up the street, 141 in Fulton County in Johns Creek. But director of Redemptive Unity, previous to that, or prior to that, I was working with high school students. So, and we had a pretty big reach with our high school ministry, including Norcross, Paul Duke, which is, of course, a very, I have a vested interest in doing ministry and doing work in our community, both as a resident, but then also as a minister.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Kibo, love for you to introduce yourself. Many people might already know you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to?
Thank you very much. My name is Keybo Taylor. I am originally from Lawrenceville, Georgia. Born and raised here in Gwinnett County. I think I'm one of the few original people that we meet from time to time. Have lived here practically my whole life. Have raised my family here, my kids, and now we're currently raising our grandkids here. I'm a retired law enforcement professional. I spent 26 years with the Gwinnett County Police Department, where I retired at the rank of major. My connections to Peachtree Corner Circle is when I first got out of the academy, I was assigned to the West Side Precinct, and I spent a great deal of time during that time working in the Peachtree Corner Circle area. Came back to the West Side Precinct as a lieutenant, as the day watch commander. Spent some more time there, and then the majority of my time in the police department was spent working in the criminal investigation division. So, I'm fairly familiar with a lot of things that was going on in the Peachtree Corner Circle area. As I said before, I am retired. I spent some time working in the school system, some time working in mental health, in the mental health field. And currently I'm a candidate, Democratic candidate for the sheriff's position here, the sheriff's office here in Gwinnett County.
Fabulous. And I'll introduce myself for folks that may not have heard from me before. I'm a local resident here in Peachtree Corners as well. Own and operate a business here. My family lives here, and we've had the pleasure of living here for the past 5+ years in Peachtree Corners, and just really love the community and find different ways to be involved in the communities in different ways. And I met Rico just reaching out one day, and we met for coffee and started talking about, we would have coffees every week and just talk about things that are impacting the community. I love the work that Rico does in helping with communication and the publications within the community. And we've started to continue these dialogues and invite some guests along with us to talk about things that are happening in the community that are impacting the community. So just looking forward to this discussion on community leadership in the community leadership when it comes to topics of social and racial justice. I want to start off with if I could throw out a question for discussion with the group, just, as things have been happening over the past month, how have you been feeling about the protest and some of the issues around racial injustice that's been happening in the country as a whole? And just curious how that's been received, your thoughts about that to begin with. Jimmy, do you mind if I start with you?
Sure, I don't mind at all. Yeah, as a minister and myself as a Korean American, my parents immigrated to the States in 1971, and so I've only known America, U.S. citizen, and my parents were always very proud to talk about their experience as immigrants coming to the United States and being able to start small businesses and to varying degrees of success. And they did their best to teach me about, knowing my Korean heritage and culture and history, ingraining those things in me, but then also pushing and challenging me to really to become American. And that really has been a quest of mine ever since young childhood, even into my 40s. You know, for someone that's an Asian American who is often, for my Korean family and friends, hardly Korean enough. And then for my American friends, just because of the way that I look and my ethnic heritage, never American enough. You know, and that depends and varies between, you know, different groups of people that I hang out with. But that can put you in a very interesting spot in terms of your own identity. And so I say all that because I do think that's at the heart of it, a big part of where we find our country today. It's an identity issue, right? It's an identity issue. If you want to go all the way to the top, just about, well, where's America now? What does America look like now? And then ultimately asking the question, should these things be happening? And for me as a minister and as an Asian American, no, I don't believe these things should be happening. I don't think anyone's intent in all of this was for things to unravel. That may be the intent of a very, very, very small select few, anarchists, if you will. But I think that is more the rarity than the norm. I think there is a lot of frustration. I think there is a lot of anger even, and a lot of misguided information that's coming out. And really, you see it out in the public sphere. The dialogue or the rhetoric is, if you're not for me, then you're against me. And I think that can be very, very problematic when it comes to just having a civil discourse. I think we have lost our way in a lot of senses in having the ability to listen to someone, empathize with someone, and even with people that we may disagree with. And so I feel uneasy for sure. I'm worried or concerned for my family and for my kids and for their safety. And I'll end with this, or this little part with this. You know, I participated in a march not too long ago in a protest. And my son, who is 6 years old, who had learned about Martin Luther King Jr. in school, was telling me, "Dad, I don't want you to go on this protest or to this march." And I was telling him, you know, this is what Dad does, and this is why I believe I need to go. And he said, well, Martin Luther King Jr., he was fighting against those types of things about people being treated unfairly or unjustly because of their skin color and their heritage. And he died for that. Daddy, I don't want you to go and be a part of something where you might put your life at risk. And we had a sobering conversation, as sobering as you can have with a 6-year-old, right? About the realities of the world that we live in, but then also, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, and that means we got to listen. We have to build relationship with people. I really believe that.
Thank you. Julie, maybe you could, you know, build on, I know you have young children, and so you probably are having similar discussions.
Yeah, you know, just kind of echoing what Jimmy said. People in America are just, there's no in between, right? You're either this side or this side. One thing that we talk a lot with our kids about is that, you know, you treat people the way you want to be treated, regardless of what they look like. We probably participated in the same march, the One Race March on Atlanta last week. And, you know, we told our kids why we were going and what we were doing. And my 7-year-old said, because there was a One Race March on it at Stone Mountain a couple of years ago. She said, well, Mommy, didn't we solve that already? Like, didn't we solve racism? And, you know, to her, when you explain racism to a kid, that somebody would treat somebody differently because their skin color is different, that actually makes no sense, right? Like they see it for how silly it is. And so in her mind, she was like, oh, we solved that problem, right? Like now we're all back to being kind to each other. And, you know, that was heartbreaking because we had to say, no, honey, like there's, you know, this keeps happening. People keep getting killed simply because they don't look like someone else. And so we have a lot of honest conversations with our kids. I feel like as white parents, we have to be having those conversations with our kids. I think a lot of white culture has not had those conversations. which is why we're still, dealing with this today.
It's interesting as you're describing what the conversations with your kids are dealing with. I'm curious, Kibo, when you look at this from your experience with law enforcement and what you're hearing in the community, how do these protests strike you?
Well, being old enough to remember, I grew up in the 60s. I can remember the protests. I remember Dr. King and a lot of his work. You see some stark similarities, but then again, there's some strong differences now than what we saw back then. And then also, looking at it from a law enforcement, perspective is something that I did, and it just gives me a little bit more insight, I would say, to have more things to think about. Back in the 60s, protesting was really one of the only remedies that we actually had as African Americans to bring the light on to, the racial injustice, social injustice, and other things that was going on at that time. Today, what you see is that we have, so many other more platforms that we can use to get the message out. Protesting is just one of it, one thing that we could do, but we have others also. Another difference that you see now is from then, even though that there were white people that was out there on the lines that was marching with King and doing things on the scenes and behind the scenes to help advance, social and racial justice for the people here in America. What I see now is I'm so glad to see the number of diversity out there. Okay, I look at some of the marches, and the whites and others are they're highly represented out there. So that brings a different set of awareness to what we're dealing with. From a law enforcement perspective, it's unfortunate that, a lot of these things that is going on that we're actually talking about and we are addressing now has only come to light because you've seen the systematic racism that's in law enforcement, along with the unchecked excessive violence that you see, coming from law enforcement. And I think when you see the excessive use of force, the violence toward people, and you marry that with the racism that you see that's happening toward African Americans, it's so much more profound. It's what we used to say is something that actually shocks the conscience that, it has caused more people outside of African Americans to take a look and say, hey, wait a minute, hold on, this is not right. This is something that needs to change, and we need to go ahead and start addressing these issues. And so when you see that, and you see that they get started addressing these issues, then it brings to light other issues. There's so many other different social injustices that's going on out here. Things that is, that has been symbolic of racism that has gone on in this country, practically throughout the history of this country, even, back after the Civil War. So we recognize, or I recognize that, there's some needs for some serious reform, some serious change out here, and not just on criminal justice, but on so many, there's a lot of different other areas that we need to start looking at and taking steps toward reforming.
Rico, I'm curious to get your perspective. You cover, over years from, your background in politics to today in the community. How did the protests and a lot of the discussion appears to you?
It's interesting. Jimmy brought this up, Kibo, and even Julie. The breadth of the diversity within the people that are protesting was something that was really apparent. I mean, I'm 61 years old. I don't know how old Kibo is, but I go back a while. When you see protests, it's almost tribal in a way, right? When I go back to my days in college, Italians hung out with Italians. We had the Italian American Student Union, and there were a couple of African American clubs. There were several Jewish American clubs and stuff, a variety of clubs, but everyone had their own places, it seemed. And when I got to City College, it was, my background from there was like, why are we all separated a little bit? And, it mirrors society, because even the government, the student government within a college system, whoever was in power was giving money to those that were their friends that shared the same maybe look or culture. When I got there, it was like, well, how come the Italian American Student Union is getting like $5 compared to these other clubs getting thousands of dollars? An exaggeration, but, I'm a white guy, but still Italian Americans looked the same way, it seemed. And that's just a cultural thing. So imagine when it's on your face, if you will. So I can't be where you are like that, but I do see, I've had friends in law enforcement that I wonder why they're in law enforcement. The way they would look at things and hearing them code words and stuff like that they would use, and like, what are you guys talking about? And it's just like the ridiculousness of it, because like Julie said, when you're young and you have kids don't know anything. Kids know what's there, and it's so innocent of they don't have any parameters. And unfortunately, they grow up through the school system and through their neighborhoods and where they are, and they don't know any different, and they learn from the people around them. And so it really is a cultural change that has to happen. I forget which judge on the Supreme Court said it best, I think, where she said, you can't change just the laws. That won't do it. We've done that, right? The Civil War was fought, but there were slaves that until 2 years later still didn't know they were free. So, I mean, if we don't culturally change and accept and absorb other cultures and be tolerant, I think this will just keep going on.
I think as you mentioned that,
unfortunately.
As you say that, Rico, I think about here locally in Gwinnett County or Metro Atlanta, and the diversity that's represented here in our community of Peachtree Corners, if you get down to the micro level. I see there's an opportunity as we get closer to learn more about the different types of injustices that might be present but not obvious to everyone. So I'm curious, have you seen or experienced injustices in whatever form, whether larger or smaller, in your day-to-day life here in our community? I'd just be curious if anyone could share any experiences they might have had in this safe environment that we're having with our discussion. Maybe Kibo, I'll start off with you.
Yes, when you look at it, the biggest thing, one of the issues that comes to mind with me right now is education. And that is definitely a form of social injustice. I have a godson. So he goes to, and I'm not going to call out the school's name right now, but I can remember sitting in on some of the meetings with him, some of his IEP meetings, and just watching how the stance that the school system took toward not wanting to give this kid services that he needed and services that he deserved. And it took the parents having to have to go in and file complaints with the federal government and the state government to force the school system to come in and actually provide services under the law that this kid was entitled to. So, you know, that's just one form of it. And then when you see, you know, if we talk about racial injustice, you know, there's sexual discrimination, you know, right now, you know, based upon gender, you know, gender identity, you know, there's, you know, a lot of people, you know, that you see it and you see it almost every day, you know, as to what it looked like. But one of the biggest issues that I see is in healthcare. You know, and if we didn't believe that there's social injustice as far as healthcare goes, if we didn't see that before, this COVID virus is really bringing it out to light now. You know, when you see the racial breakup of people who are, you know, affected by it and what type of care that they're getting, the lack of insurance, the lack of coverage, you know, these are the things, man, that, you know, they just, you know, it's right here in our face as we go along. So, that's just a few things, man. And, you know, and then, you know, from a police perspective, you know, when you look at it, if you look at the numbers, you know, when we're talking about domestic violence toward women, you know, black women, you know, or, you know, they're more so to be a victim of domestic violence than any other race or class or gender out here. So, you know, those are just a few things, man, that comes to mind for me.
Okay. How about you, Julie? Have you, you know, as you've lived, have you seen or what have you observed or experienced?
So I crowdsourced this question a little bit with some of my friends last night. I have not personally felt discriminated against or, you know, any injustices against me personally, but I was curious as to what some of my friends would say. And so the thing that kept several people mentioned was just the wealth distribution in Peachtree Corners, you know, and then the representation on our city council and our other layers of government. It's very much the wealthy white as the representation. You know, the money is in the northern side of the county, whether you look at Simpson Elementary versus Peachtree Elementary, things like sidewalks, you know, so that's what people kept pointing to. This is a fairly controversial topic, so I'm a little bit hesitant to bring it up, but even the pedestrian bridge that's going across Peachtree Parkway. Several years ago, the mayor asked for a pedestrian safety commission to be formed, and I was on that task force. And we spent 9 months studying pedestrian safety, studying our area, looking at data from the Gwinnett County Police as to where, you know, incidents were with traffic and pedestrians and things like that. And what we found was that the people in the southern part of the city, they have to walk. It's often a one-car family. They often walk to the grocery store, to the bus stops, things like that to get to work. And so people who need to walk need a safe way to cross Peachtree Parkway, right? So we presented this information to the city council and to the mayor, and where does the bridge go? It goes on the northern part of the city, you know, where people want to walk. They want to go from the Forum to the town center and things like that. And I know that there were other issues involved with the bridge and with development and things like that, but I feel like it's a perfect example of we're putting resources and money where it's nice instead of where it's needed, you know? And so I would love to see Peachtree Corners, just as a community, we come together and we say, hey, how can we help? You know, are you guys safely crossing the road? The data is showing that it's not true. Would a bridge help? You know, would this money be better spent on better bus systems, things like that?
Jimmy, I wonder if you could comment as you see it through the church at Perimeter and others in the community. Have you seen it manifest itself in that or even as you're saying, just living in the community?
Yeah, sure. I have a lot of thoughts swirling in my head, and I'll start with this. There was a lunch that I had at the Jason's Deli in DeForum with my daughter, who at the time I think was maybe only 3 or 4 years old. It was just her and I, um, and we're enjoying a daddy-daughter date during lunch, and there was another family behind us in the booth, and they had a couple of young kids, a little older than my daughter, perceivably, and every Asian knows this, but and is never it doesn't ever cease to amaze me. But we've all had the shared experience of someone making the slanty eye gesture toward you, right? I grew up with that. You let it roll off your back. But it was geared toward my daughter, and this was the first time I've ever seen that and experienced that as a father, I should say. And like any father would, I got pretty upset, and I had to internally calm myself down. And I turned to these young kids and I said, "Hey, I don't know where you learned that from, but we don't do that. That is." What you are doing. I didn't say it quite like this, and you kind of relive those moments whenever you live through something like this. You're like, oh, I should have said this instead. But if to the effect of, hey, we don't devalue someone's existence and minimize their existence to a gesture or to a facial feature or to a skin tone. I hope that you will stop using that and know that that is a very disrespectful thing that you just did. We finished our lunch and we went along our way, but that has it stung. It stung. And I say that to kind of get to a point about how we live in our own narratives, right? And in fact, we probably curate our narratives quite a bit, right? We think about the stories that we want to live or the lifestyle that we want to live, and then we curate it, whether it's out of comfort, maybe it's out of control. Maybe it's out of, I want to earn someone's approval, so I'm going to live this way. I'm going to have this kind of lifestyle. For some, it's out of fear. You have no other options, and so this is just the life that you have. But one way or another, to one degree or another, I really do feel that every individual, they curate their own narrative. And one of the things I've been challenging our people here at Perimeter, and just anyone that will have this conversation with me, is to stop and take inventory of your narrative. And that's not some kind of like big psychological or philosophical thing. It's just simply take stock of where you are, where do you live, who your friends are, who are your closest associates. When do you ever interact with people that are not like you? And for minority people, that's easy, right? I'm often around people who aren't like me. And so for me, kind of going in and out of majority culture, I'm pretty fluid at it. But if you've never had that experience, or you don't have those opportunities, and you've curated such a neat narrative for yourself where everything's comfortable, and I'm not saying comfort's a bad thing. Don't hear me wrong. But when everything is curated to your liking, of course, when you see something like this happen, there's a temptation to say, well, I'm going to turn off the TV. I'm going to turn off social media. I'm going to get away from it. I'm going to opt out of the conversation. And because of COVID, because of just the weightiness of the current situation, it's harder and harder to opt out. It's harder and harder to tune off or turn off the narrative that's coming to us and making us aware of the narrative that we're in. And so the ways that I see injustices or just racial disparity is in a lot of ways, it's implicit. We've put ourselves in these situations, not even realizing where we are, because we're looking for personal comfort, and we're looking for other things besides what ultimately I believe where we're going to find our true value in life and our true purpose in life, which I believe is in Christ and it's in God. And I believe that all human beings, regardless of your ethnicity or your race, regardless of your paycheck size or where you live or what kind of car you drive or don't drive, that you are still made in his image, in God's image. And because of that, every human being has got inherent dignity. But it's just so easy to ignore that. And then we say, well, you're less dignified than me because of, and you come up with the reasons, right? Because we've curated our own narratives. And Julie, you mentioned this. I think one of the biggest ways that we see that in Peachtree Corners is just in the three schools that service, or three elementary schools that service our city, right? You go from Stripling to Peachtree to Simpson. You could not have a more vast difference in terms of our schools. Now, granted, I know like the neighborhoods that these schools are in, vastly different. But with my kids at Simpson, I mentor over at Peachtree. Kids are kids, you know, but you notice that even attitude, you know, my attitude is different when I walk into my kids' school versus the attitude that I have when I go over and mentor at Peachtree. And in the past, when I've mentored and had relationship with administration over at Stripling, it's very, very eye-opening. And I don't exclude myself from that introspection. And I would love to see more people introspect before accusing other people. Now that's assuming a lot, and assuming the best out of my neighbors, but I will venture to do that for the sake of for the sake of the health of our community, and our church overall.
I remember years ago, I had a mentor who did an interesting thing. At the time, I didn't understand why he did it, but he would volunteer his time at a inner city school, although his kids didn't go to that school or didn't do it. And he was teaching everyone that was on his staff about leadership. He said it was convenient to serve where it's comfortable. Your neighborhood, your church, your school. It's the easiest. It's the closest. Your friends, family, the country clubs that you might participate in. What's more uncomfortable is going out of that comfort zone and serving where there might be a greater need. And he found more fulfillment over his life serving people that might have been different than him in communities that were different than him, and helping put his talents, his resources, his connections to work, whether it's helping people find jobs, preparing resumes, learning leadership skills, communication skills. And he challenged everyone on his staff to do something similar. It was literally required of us to do it as how we evaluated. And what he was doing was he was trying to stretch us to learn and build a habit into seeking out those things so you don't get comfortable with what's easy and you find ways. And he was being very selfish in a manner that he was trying to teach us to be better leaders. Because one day he might need us to lead a business somewhere that in China or in India or in different parts of the country. And we're going to have to learn how to work and relate with people. So it was part of his development plan. I see today in our community plenty of opportunity for people to put their talents at work in different places that are needed. It's just, I wonder, I'm always curious as to how to make that easier for people. How do we encourage people? And I see a couple different lanes from in the business community. If you're a CEO or a leader, you can help develop your people in that way by encouraging them to get involved in causes that might help drive social and racial justice. If you're an individual in your family, you can do family things together where you participate in communities, helping bring talents and resources available to them. I'm curious, in your discussions with your networks and communities, have you seen examples of people doing that well? Rico, why don't I start with you?
Sure. I mean, with the podcast I've been doing over the last 3 years with Peachtree Corners Magazine, and quite frankly, I try to dig these things out, if you will, because it's not always apparent and it's not always out there, right? I come from New York, from Brooklyn. I grew up first generation American. Also, my parents were immigrants. And so when I moved south from New York, where I was working doing constituent work for Chuck Schumer's office when he was a congressman, did that for a year. So I got to really learn a lot along those lines. So when I moved down here to the south of the Mason-Dixon line, it's kind of funny, very different. I would see people waving their hands at me as we drove down the street, and I'd say to my wife, "Do we know them?" And it'd be like, "No." So it's just people being nice. Not that they're not nice in New York, but it's a little different, So what I made my mission to do is find out a bit more. I mean, I became went from being a Brooklyn Catholic boy to a Baptist. I realized a lot of the churches in the areas give back a lot, that they create these programs that you can be involved in as a resident. So you don't have to be stuck in what you're doing. And they're not just doing it for, Thanksgiving. Let's go do the soup kitchen. They're doing it 365 days a year. Their kids are going on mission trips. I don't think you can find, at least in certain places, and not every family is the same way, but I don't think you can find families where they're not doing, especially if they're middle class, let's call it, right? Because they're on a mission to try to get their kids maybe to be involved in the community, because it's a different level, I think. And maybe I'm not putting this the right way, in the sense that there's time and money, and time and money gives you certain things, right? We all tried to work hard. My dad worked 18-hour shifts to make sure that we were educated. So he didn't have the time to make sure that we were involved in the community. It was different. I have that time. My wife has that time. We've all been involved. So I do see that. I see a lot of organizations like Joe Sawyer's Bridges that helps the Peachtree Corners community. I see Peachtree Corners Baptist Church, Mary Our Queen, a variety of denominations, and they all within them do things in the community, food drives, blood drives, any kind of drives you can think they're doing. They're involving their kids in it. So there's a lot of stories like that to be able to be told. And we've done that in the magazine, not just organizations, but individuals, right? Going out of their way, doing things. But, you go back home after that, and it's what you do in your home really that counts. I like what Jimmy did, turning to the kids at that diner, because were their parents embarrassed, by the way? Because I would have been embarrassed if my kids did that.
Well, the mom happened to be not at the table at the time. Maybe she had gone up to the salad bar to the restroom, and then, and I don't know if it was all tied in. Maybe they were waiting for their opportunity. I don't like to think that was what they were doing. It just all happened that way. And the kids turned around and they didn't say anything after that. And I didn't say anything to the mom afterward. So.
And that's fine, depending on how old the kids were. Kids are kids, and they do stupid things sometimes, They innocently think maybe it's funny, and they just don't know better, maybe.
Right.
But there's a lot of stories out there to be told. I'm still finding more and more. I will never run out of stories to tell in this magazine or on the podcast, and you know that, Karl. I mean, we go through a lot of interviews, and I'd like to hear what these guys have to say, though, in their lives, where they're pulling things from.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's tons of opportunities to serve.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think there's a danger in saying, okay, I've done my service, check. Now I'm going to go back to my comfortable circle, like Jimmy was saying, with everyone who is my friend looks exactly like me, and we all do the same things, and whatever. So what my husband and I have been intentional about the last couple of years is, yes, do the community service things for sure, but also diversify your circle, whether that's, you have people over for dinner who don't look like you, or you listen to authors and, podcasters and voices who don't look like you or don't think the same things that you think. Because once you are connected with people in a real and meaningful way, then stuff like George Floyd hits home way harder. Like when you are friends with Black men and you are, your kids play with Black boys, then that kind of situation is much more heartbreaking, right? Whereas if you're only surrounded by white people, if you only go to church with white people, you only work with white people, then you could look at a situation like George Floyd or Rashard Brooks or, you know, any of that, and just kind of say, oh, that, you know, that's sad, and move on. And so, you know, I think, yes, service is important, but I think we also need to all start with getting out of our comfort zones and reaching across the street, you know, the city, wherever, and inviting people into our lives who aren't like us. Because, I don't know, if you look at the systemic nature of racial injustice, it can be really overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And it's overwhelming for me and for my husband to think, okay, well, what can we do about this, right? And so that's why we're determined to never go back to living in a white bubble, because that's what I can do to change, right? I can make sure my kids know not to make slanty eyes at people, you know, and they know why. And if they see somebody doing that, then they will say, hey, that's not nice, or that's wrong. And I, you know, Jimmy, I applaud you so much for standing up for your daughter and having her hear you stand up for her, right? Because that's how we're going to change this country is, you know, I don't think myself personally is going to be able to dismantle the system, but I can start by building a new system with my children and my community that will hopefully create some change.
I'm wondering, Kibo, if you could comment on, yeah, I was going to ask you to comment on if you think about it from a community leadership level, whether it's in local government, it's in law enforcement. What would you like to see? What can leaders in that to help lift up the community, since they have a role in leading the community?
Well, first of all, just to piggyback a little bit off of what we're talking about here, the key to, we all want change. And what does that change look like? What is that change? And so, you know, if we want transformative change, you know, two things we have to have is the understanding of diversity, and we have to understand the inclusion of that diversity. You know, it's one thing to have an organization, an agency, or whatever it is, and you can come out and say, well, look and see, you know, I have a diverse, my agency is diverse. I got people in position A, B, C, D. But, you know, when you look at it and you still see problems in those agencies, you go back and you say, well, you might have the diversity, but do you really have the inclusion? Okay. Are you actually listening to and allowing that diversity to have a voice in how you craft your policies, you know, what you do, what you don't do, how you serve? And I hear everybody talking about service. I look at service in just a little bit different way. I believe service comes natural. I believe we serve every day. Every day you get up and you walk out here, you know, when you encounter, you know, you encounter people, you know, how you help folks, if you help make the decision to help anybody. But anything that comes out of your mouth that could be influential is a service. You know, what you do, how you conduct yourself. You know, if you're the head of an agency, you know, what are you doing to make sure that, you know, everybody has a voice at the table, and you're doing the right thing for everybody in that organization or everybody in the community. So, you know, from an agency standpoint, I think that, you know, we have to start looking at, you know, putting leaders in places that, you know, have the vision, and not just looking at, you know, hey, I'm going to have, you know, this level of diversity, but, you know, you have to be willing to set up, you know, venues so that these people can have a voice in what they're doing and what you're doing. So I just see it just, you know, I mean, I think we're all on the same, we're all saying the same thing, you know, just from different aspects of it is what does that actually look like?
I'm also wondering if you look at how to bring new voices to the table when decisions are being made. I see it, whether it's in a church, you could look at the elder community and the leaders of the church. You could look at the schools, the school boards, the people that support school board. You could look at it at the agencies that might support local government, whether it's police. I don't know if in Gwinnett County we have a community board that communicates or liaisons with the police in cities like Gwinnett or counties like Gwinnett and others. But bringing these varied voices to the table where, one, policies are made, two, holding people accountable for the change we're trying to see at local levels. How do we as citizens or in parts of communities start impacting what our leaders do?
I think from that perspective, when you look at, and I'm talking about from a law enforcement standpoint, law enforcement, how, we've conducted business in the past, it will fundamentally change. Society is going to make sure, that it changed, especially when, you go back and you look and when I say look at the passion that people have out here now, what are we seeing? The more inclusive folks out here that is pushing for these changes. You have to have, some, internal things that's going to have to change. You're going to have some external things that's going to have to change. And, you can't, good leaders are not going to be, resistant to having, like citizens review panels out here that, that can come in and help review some of the things that's going on in your agencies. I think that that's going to be something that's going to be necessary going forward. And I think that that's something that all of the law enforcement agencies here in Gwinnett County should be, taking a look at to see what that actually looked like. And
should
then
people,
too,
no, I was gonna ask, should people be asking that? There's the 8 Can't with Campaign Zero and 8 Can't Wait, which has 8 different policies that at least some of their data proves that has been able to reduce excessive use of force on people of color. It includes citizen review board. It includes holding leaders accountable and having to speak up. There's a whole bunch of different policies in there. How do we get that on the table for the leaders to discuss, make decisions that includes, in the example Julie gave with the bridge earlier on, how do you make sure that the people at the table making the decision include all the stakeholders, all the people that are impacted by the decision? So at least wherever decision comes, the debate is had, and everyone has to agree to a course of action that serves everyone, not just a smaller group.
Well, first of all, and I agree with the fact that those external panels do help to show a reduction in certain areas, such as use of force and things such as that. But what I say is this: it starts with leadership at the top. I go back and I say, going in, you have to have a leader that has the vision to know and understand what diversity is. And not just saying that I have diversity, but you have inclusion also. So that means that your diversity is actually out there interacting with the citizens, okay, in their cultures, whatever that culture may be, and that they're bringing that information back in, and that you're able to sit down and come up and communicate and organize plans to where, you are understanding the different cultures, the different races, and everything else that makes up Gwinnett County. And I say Gwinnett County because I'm in Gwinnett County. That's where it actually starts. So then the second part of it is that, you have your staff and you have the same mindset is that everything that we're doing at the top, we're going to make sure that that trickled down to the remaining staff. Okay, we're going to go in and we're going to change policies. We're going to look at use of force. We're going to look at officers' complaints. We're going to, look at, Are we doing the right thing when we're applying force? What was good yesterday obviously is not good today. So you have to have, someone in leadership that has the visionary to see and project, hey, this is where we're moving to. And you got to be willing to adapt to what we're seeing now and make changes. Um, this Everything that we talk about can happen. Okay, it's not just the external things. Where it starts at is internally inside of those agencies. Who are you bringing in? What policies are you changing? What are you willing to do? And again too, and to make a long story short, we have to be willing to listen to the public. You have to be willing to listen to, diverse groups outside. And I say, one thing that I look at is, and Jimmy has alluded to, the faith-based community, that's very important. But see, one thing that we're not talking about is that we've gotten, it's almost like one of those Godzilla movies where we waking Godzilla up. We're waking these youth up out here. These youth are passionate. We just have to make sure that we channel that passion in the right way so that they have a voice that is heard. And we have to listen to what they're saying. We have to make sure that we're including these people in at the table, hearing what they have to say, and coming up with plans to where, they can feel safe in the future. And if they don't feel safe, then we're not doing our job out here, whether that's law enforcement, whether that's community leaders, whether that's church leaders, whether that's parents, whatever it is, we need to do more to make sure that everybody is being heard and everybody's doing their part.
Thank you. And that well said on that. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I wanted to ask a last question to everybody to consider. If there was a wish that you could have on something to impact change around social and racial justice in our community here in Peachtree Corners, I'd be curious what your thoughts would be around that for people. So Jimmy, maybe I could start with you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one, I do think just active engagement goes a long way. So whether that's at the school level, engaging with your children's classroom, getting to know your teachers, getting to know administration, and actively seeking opportunities to serve, and not just not only your specific school, but thinking about your cluster as well. So, with a fifth grader next year, I'm already thinking about Pinckneyville and thinking about what are some ways I can get involved there, and who are the people that maybe I need to get in touch with about carrying on conversations. Teenage years are just a difficult time to begin with. And so how can we support other parents? Because at that point, it becomes less about what are the external issues. People are thinking about internal issues of my child is behaving, in this manner, and I need support and I need help. And so thinking about that. Also, just being intentional with when we go out. I've tried really hard lately not to judge my city. It sometimes is very hard to do that. And when I say judge my city, I mean, like, as a Korean American, there are no Korean American restaurants in Peachtree Corners. Let's just be honest. You can loosely Asian, and I think it's hard pressed. And that's just me. So I will go down to Beaufort Highway, and I'll go over to Duluth for those things. But when I do dine in my city, and I do want to support local businesses, I want to support the local economy. When I do, I'm often just looking around. If I'm there with my kids and my wife, I'll ask my kids, hey, do you recognize anyone from your school? Do you? Okay, I'm going to, as an introvert, this is really hard. I'm going to muster up the courage. I'm going to go over and say, hey, I don't know you, but my kids recognize your kids. We go to the same school. Just want to introduce myself, and hopefully let that be kind of a conversation starter. And perhaps I'll see them at the school again for some events, or maybe I'll see them somewhere else in the community. This summer, we didn't have this, but Gwinnett County Summer Swim is a great opportunity get to know some of my own neighbors within my own swim team, but then also as I mingle with other parents and families. And for me, again, as a minority person, I do think that there is a responsibility for me to reach out, because I don't know, and I don't want to assume that people are going to reach out to me. Oh, there's an Asian guy. Let's go make him my friend. I know that how that might feel, and I know how that might sound. It just sounds too tokenistic. It just feels like what I think, Kibo, you're getting at is just more the diversity for diversity's sake, counting the noses in the crowd, so to say. So knowing this myself, I have to take it upon myself to introduce myself to other people and get to know people within my community. I don't know if I can speak as eloquently as Kibo did just in regards to like on the top down, but I'm thinking oftentimes bottom up. So for me, that's my immediate neighborhood, my street. I'm thinking about the other kids that are in my kids' classrooms and their teachers. Thinking also, obviously, about my church and the faith community and what I can do to help foster some of those conversations. Because let's be honest, the indictment against the church is often that we have set up this enclave, and it's not as missional and it's not as outwardly focused as I believe the gospel demands that Christians be, because it's comfortable. It's easy to be around people like you. I'm guilty of this myself, and I want to challenge myself as well as my neighbors in Peachtree Corners more broadly. Hey, let's get to know some other people. And when we disagree, can we stop and listen and try to learn a little bit about why they may disagree from our viewpoint? And maybe, just maybe, that empathy and that amount of patience can possibly lead to deeper friendships, deeper relationships, and to deeper lasting community change.
Well, I love that, Jimmy, and sign me up. You and I we'll get together with the families and
Absolutely.
let's lead by example and get
right.
that started. So
That's right.
appreciate it. Julie, what would your wish be if there could be a change implemented?
I echo what Jimmy said. As you were talking, I was thinking about something that Decatur did. I don't know, maybe a year ago. They just signed people up to have dinners at different people's houses, and I would love if we could figure out a social distancing way to bring people together and, maybe have a picnic in the yard or something, just to seek to understand each other. I think that would be, I'm all about that. I'm all about gathering people over food. But secondly, going back to what Kibo was saying, I would love to have confidence in our system top down, and I would love to have some transparency from Gwinnett County Police and from, our local law officials and elected officials, like what is happening, and how can we support the police and law enforcement so that they can do their jobs well, but also how can we trust that they are doing their job to protect and serve all of the people. So I would just love some transparency. I would love to be on a citizen board or, have that be organized. I think that sounds fantastic. And yeah, I'm all about it.
I'm going to throw it to you, Rico. What church would you like to see?
Kibo hit it right, though, right? If you don't have, I don't want to distill it down to a Chick-fil-A, but if you go to Chick-fil-A, right, the leadership down, everyone knows what is expected, what's coming out of that window. It's service. There's a certain attitude of service, right? I think government needs to be that way. It needs to not just trickle down, that needs that waterfall coming down from the top. If you don't have the leadership that's going to provide that, it's difficult for the rest of it to sort of fall in place. So I agree with Kibo that it needs to start there. Certain things, I think it was Andrew Cuomo that just accepted just with executive order, put in the 8 rules that we were just talking about.
It
right?
can't wait. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can't wait. So he just put that in through executive order. Leadership like that can help, right? So there's that. There's also involvement. I mean, you're right. You can't stop it at just an organizational involvement. You need it to do it in a personal involvement. And it shouldn't stop at your door, but it's difficult. People are paying the bills, they're working, life goes on. So it's a difficult proposition, I think, for people to do that. But it needs to start with the boss, with the leader, with the head going down, but people have to have that buy-in also, right? They have to realize it's good for them too, because if it's not going to go anywhere. And if it's good for them, listen, Jimmy, were you talking about Korean restaurants in Peachtree Corners, all right? You could do Soul Train, which is something like Gwinnett County does, right? I love Korean food. I love Italian food. I love food. Julia, right? Food will bring people together, but all of us, there's always something that's going to affect us. I mean, I won't tell you what company it was or what organization, but someone, when it first came down, decided they needed to put my picture on a mugshot of Most Wanted. And I don't know if it was done for funny or not, but I'm Italian, and I guess they thought it was funny, like a mobster type thing. I didn't think it was funny, right? But things happen. Sometimes you do have to let it roll off you, and sometimes you just set them straight, just talk about it. And people get to understand you. So you do have to be open, and sometimes it's past your comfort zone. So we all have to work on this. You can't just expect that one group is going to do it. We all have to do it. Otherwise, it's just not going anywhere.
I'd be curious, Kibo. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jimmy, I just learned Korean barbecue.
Oh.
And part of my, and if you ever see me, I love to eat. Okay. So I'm searching. But one thing that Julie had brought up, and we started laughing because Karl and I, when we spoke yesterday, we talked about the dinners that you're talking about, and they're called Chicago dinners. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what it's called. And I was telling Karl yesterday that I think it would be good for him to reach out to those, to the people that actually set those up, and maybe look at hosting one. Julie, I'm also put that challenge to you also. Yeah, I'm going to put that to you also. I think that's great. When we look at and what we talk about changes and what that looks like or what it should look like, we also got to look at including advocacies in there too, because that's a very important part that is actually missing. So that participation has to be, they have to be, we have to talk about being, culturally competent and inclusive in our policy changes. So learning the different cultures and making sure that we include them in on what is going on and what's being said. And just the last thing is when you gotta have, this is something else that Karl and I talked about, when do you have the courage to step up and say or intervene when you see things that are not, that is being done that's not right. It was good to hear you, Julie, say that you wanted transparency, and one thing that I talk about all the time is trust and transparency. And, you recognize it, but if you go into, communities, especially communities of color, Asian communities, there, Hispanic communities, Latino Hispanic communities, the first thing you hear about is the lack of trust. Okay. And when you're not transparent, that doesn't breed for trust. And somewhere along the line, we have to, again, break those cycles so that, we go into these communities, especially from a law enforcement standpoint, everybody has to, trust what is going on. And that's 90% of what you see. Let me rephrase that. 99% of what you see right now is the lack of trust. And, from the law enforcement community, we have fostered that system to where there is no trust. Nobody trusts whether you're right, whether you're wrong. It's just a lack of trust there. So, we're going to have to go back in there and figure out, what do we do? How do we reestablish trust? And Julie, more people like you are going to have to be the ones that are stepping up to saying that, hey, issuing that challenge, not just for people of color, but, we have to have that voice from you also saying, hey, you know what? We have to have a department, or an agency here that, that is transparent and that we can trust is going to do the right thing.
Oh, I love that you highlight that issue of trust. And if I could wrap up with what my wish would be, I pray for a day when leaders emerge that bring both their heart and their minds together to lead the people in the community, from whether you're leading in your house, whether you're leading in your business or your church or your school, or you're leading in government. Look at the information that's out there, understand different points of view, formulate policies and communicate them to drive, but also listen with your heart and understand a different point of step out. And there's a couple ways to do that. I'd love to see people in the community that have these traits step up and lead, run for elected office, get involved in community, take your talents that you have that made you successful in life and work and business, and bring it to address some of these social justice, whether it's around ageism, whether it's around sexism, whether it's around racism. Take the talents that you have and bring it to a higher cause where the whole community benefits. There are some leaders that might already be in place and they can go through that transition themselves and challenge themselves to learn and grow. I know that sounds broad and wide, but I think if individuals look in themselves and make a choice to do this, it can transform communities where the things that are happening in Minneapolis, the things that happen in Atlanta, it's harder, it insulates us from that here because we are working together to arm the police with the right training, tools, information, so they can make good choices. And the residents to work with the police so that they're able to do their job effectively, yet people in the community can do something as simple as Jimmy did and just say, kids, that's not the right way to behave. That's not acceptable. And maybe we should bring your parents into this conversation about how you've chosen to treat other people that are different, and maybe bring them to some calming understanding or holding their own kids accountable. But I think leadership starts with building trust. And the more we could do that in this community, the more we could avoid some of the challenges that other cities have been facing. So I want to thank you all. This was brave for folks to step out and have this conversation we would be having over dinner or over lunch or over coffee, and we're doing it in a public way. And we encourage other people in their small groups in church, in their work groups, in their families, sit down, have these discussions, explore their hearts and their minds, and get involved, whether it's challenging the leader for accountability, whether it's getting involved in the local school, your school, or other schools that might need your talents. But I think we could all pull together and do something. I like that idea of this grassroots. Let's not wait for top down. Start at the grassroots, and folks like Kibo and others may start at the top down, and let's meet in the middle somewhere. Thank you, guys. Rico, wrap up Peachtree Corners.
Sure. I'd like to say that we had a lot of commentary, by the way, in the comments. So I want to say thank you to the people that showed up that put some great comments online during the discussion. Takesha White-Smith, if I'm pronouncing that right, Josiah Morgan, a bunch of people on here, that Mo Riley, that participated in commentary. So it was good stuff going on online while we were also discussing here. So I appreciate you guys coming out. This is a tough discussion to have. And I'm glad that we had you on the first show. And having Kibo, who I've interviewed before. I love Kibo. I hope you win your runoff that you're in, right? Jimmy, it's good having you. And Julie, thank you for coming on too. So, Karl, it's always a pleasure working with you on these podcasts.
Oh, my pleasure. You taught me so much. So you got me out of my comfort zone. I am an introvert as well, Jimmy. And sometimes you got to step out of your comfort and do what your heart tells you is right. So look forward for more. We have more guests that are coming on. And we invite citizens, if you're interested in being part of the discussion, please feel free to reach out to me, Karl Barham. You could find me on Facebook. You could post on Peachtree Corners Life, or you can reach me at kbarham@tworld.com. And love to have a discussion and continue this and just lead by example. We could have these discussions and try to make a change. Thanks.
Hey, Karl, can I say one last
Sure.
thing? I don't want to turn this into a political pitch, but I just want the people out there to know I am running to be your next sheriff of Gwinnett County. And if you believe in what I'm saying, please go out and vote for me and give me this opportunity to try to affect this change, please.
Thank you for that, Kibo.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good seeing you guys.
Take care. Bye.